Thank you all for joining us today. I am Crystal Rodriguez, the Marketing Manager for Scottsdale's Economic Development Department.
And I'm Helen Gunn, Assistant Chief for the Scottsdale Police Department. And Crystal and I are both members of the Diversity Advisory Committee. And we're glad that you have joined us on this very important panel during Hispanic Heritage Celebration Month, where we will showcase business owners within our community. Crystal, you want to speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. So today we have compiled a panel of Latino business owners and key community stakeholders that will sit with us and kind of go through the questions that we have about doing business as Latinos.
Right, and we wanted to take this opportunity during the Hispanic Heritage Month to illustrate the many contributions that our Latino business owners and Latino community make in our own in the city of Scottsdale. And so we hope that you enjoy the panel that we put together, and we'd like to introduce them now. So we're going to start by introducing Mr. Martin Guerrero with Square Community and Small Business Advocacy. Welcome. Mr. Guerrero is an e-commerce specialist with over 10 years in the website and domain name industry. As a member of the Community Affairs and Small Business Advocacy team at Square, he has been helping Square sellers broaden their community base with an online presence, providing both on-site and online educational programs centered around e-commerce and digital payment solutions. Martin is a Latinx community lead in Scottsdale, Arizona, and participates in cross-functional projects supporting Spanish-speaking and Native American small businesses and other communities and third-party partners nationwide. Martin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Edgar Olivo, business educator. Edgar Raphael Olivo is a bilingual business educator, economic advisor, and contributor for several media outlets, including In Business Magazine and En Negocios. He's also a nonprofit executive who is passionate about creating access to financial and digital education. He is certified in finance and data analytics and holds a business degree from ASU. Woo! Hi, Edgar. Thank you for joining us so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's quite an honor. Thank you.
Our next business owner that we want to showcase is Valentina Huerta and Gianfranco Brugaletta, owners of Nona Urban Eatery. Nona is a small family-owned independent restaurant in the heart of Old Town Scottsdale. They have been in business for a little over 3 years and serve a variety of dishes based on eclectic flavors and modern Italian flair. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you all for being with us here today. We put this panel together in hopes of getting different perspectives of the Latino business community. All of you have such great stories to share and background, so we're excited to shine some much needed spotlight on Latinos that are here making things happen, not only here in Scottsdale, but in Arizona as a whole. So I'll start with the first question, and the first question is, what made you decide to take on this profession, and how did you get into this field, and what's making you stay? I'll start with Edgar.
Well, thank you so much for that question. I am a firstborn Mexican American, and I moved to Tempe in 2001 to start college, right before 9/11. And then, life takes its twists and turns. I opened my practice in 2011 in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I'm very proud to keep operating and growing from. What started it for me was being a Mexican American, having two languages at a crossroads where I have to understand how to help my parents and help them assimilate into the country. Those skills I developed very early in my life. And as I started growing up and thinking about what my next career, what my career move is going to be, I had a lot of teachers, kind of insinuate that maybe you should get into business, you should get into accounting, you should get into finance, get into that world because you speak two languages. And I didn't really understand what it meant to be bilingual in the business world until I started actually running my practice. And so now I work across the state of Arizona. I work in Latin America, providing professional development education for corporate executives who need to run and grow their businesses. And it's just been quite the journey. And the thing that's exciting for me is that not only do I get to teach business practices and executive skills, but I also get to learn from all of my students. And I think the thing that makes what I do important is the fact that I can cross different cultures through language and make the experience much better in the classroom. And so my journey has been a very interesting one, being that I had to do basically what I'm doing today at a very early age, and now I get to do it as a business. I have teams across the state. We're doing a lot of great work with some very interesting companies. The pandemic has brought on some challenges. Of course, like many businesses, we had to close our doors and make sure that we were practicing our safe CDC guidelines. And so everything worked out in our favor, being that we went completely virtual. And that has been another kind of mountain to climb and ensure that our clients understand and know how to utilize these tools so that we can help them keep growing.
Good. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, Martin.
Yeah, really similar story to Edgar there. First generation as well, born and raised here in Phoenix, Arizona. And same, right? Living in the two worlds, English and Spanish, helping my parents with the English, and then myself having to learn English while I'm growing up through the school system here. But I've always been in sales and always worked with, really helping small businesses. And once I was able to join our community affairs team, was really able to do that at a much bigger level, not only here in Arizona, but nationwide. And I really just love seeing those small businesses, and my father being a small business owner at one point and knowing very many, small business owners as well. Just seeing the struggles they go through and everything, all the resources that they need and didn't always have, and really being able to provide that for businesses now is really rewarding for me, and just love doing that. And we'll continue to do so.
Awesome. Valentina.
Well, I'm actually born in Mexico City. I grew up in Mexico. I grew up in Sonora for the first 17 years of my life. And then I decided I wanted to go to culinary school. And so I'm an artichoke. I went to Scottsdale Community. I got my degree in culinary arts. Was awarded a scholarship that took me to Europe. I went to school and worked in Monaco, where I actually met Chef Gianfranco Brugaletta. Came back, went to NAU, so got a degree in international hospitality. Worked in several hotels in the Valley as a general manager, as an F&B director, assistant general manager. Went back to Europe, having met Chef over there. I did the back and forth and finished an MBA in finance there. And then we decided that, it was a time to, if we were going to have a business, this was the time when we had the energy and the experience. And I think that as a business owner, you kind of have to mesh that. And so we decided to come back to Scottsdale, which is where basically I've been more, at this point, I've actually lived more outside of Mexico than in Mexico. And this was for me home. And so we decided to open Nona in 2016, end of 2016. Yeah. So it's, why do I do this? I mean, I think that I was always meant to do this. I was in the hotel side of things. Chef Brugaletta was always in the restaurant world. And there's something pretty intense about seeing people's faces when they enjoy food. I think that it's a very human connection. It's a very Latin, it's a very Hispanic, soulful situation. Food is always part of what we do. And I don't think that I will be able to shake that. It's just what we do. Love equals food.
Great, thank you for that. And I think that, all three of you kind of shared the same sentiment about family and how important, it is, and how kind of that was the start and core of, how you started and why you started. So very cool, very cool.
So thank you for sharing. I also heard kind of the connections to your upbringing, right? Like you, especially you came from Mexico, but then you got a lot of your experience in a worldly fashion, right? So I think that's very significant, because I think sometimes as part of our culture, we don't often kind of take ourselves out of, right, like the box that we're put in. So I really appreciate you saying that. And then Edgar and Martin as well. like I can relate to your stories around translating for your parents and the role that, right, like our families or sometimes our young people have to play in our families to further kind of the existence here in the United States. So I think for us that brings kind of an interest, our next question, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the great things that you've done and you've accomplished, but what hurdles, like what obstacles did you face as a Latino in the process of becoming a business owner, an operator, kind of in the role that you play? Like, let's talk about the realities of being a Latino in the space that you hold and or other challenges, right?
Okay. How much time do we have? No, I'm kidding. So, personally, the challenges that, because I did have such a strong upbringing, being able to help my parents with everything from paying bills to, getting groceries and, a little judicial system here and there, I got to learn a lot about how our government works. And I took on a very deep appreciation for our government. And, the state of Arizona has also experienced a lot of challenges with embracing other cultures. I was working with Talking Stick Resort during the time that HB 1070 came around and was around the block, and it affected so many businesses. In fact, I was hired because I spoke Spanish, and there were not a lot of Spanish speakers on the floor working the casino. And I took on that opportunity to be able to embrace and bring on more traffic and more business into the business that I was working for. And, I never realized just how much of an impact some of these social issues have with your consumer spending, with the way we behave in the community, with the way we engage and things like that. And so when I decided to start my business, it was not that difficult for me because I already had a business background. I already understood some of the legalities. But as I started exploring the idea of doing what I do in Spanish for the community that I live in, I started to realize that there were a lot more challenges, especially around language barriers, particularly starting with registering your business, your LLC. You can only do it in English. Unless you have someone explaining it to you in Spanish, or you hire a very expensive lawyer to help you get your business started, there are not many options if you're from a different language. And so I started looking at those situations and started thinking about how do we problem solve for other languages, for other people who speak other languages, who want to contribute to the state of our economy, who want to grow their dreams, who want to invest and leave some kind of legacy for their family. And those were some of the challenges that I experienced through my clients and watching some of the barriers that they saw. So language barriers definitely are very real. Even access to some resources can also be a difficult process if you don't know where to start. Now I'm very proud to see a very thriving and strong ecosystem in the entrepreneur space, especially since I started doing a lot of work through the Scottsdale Civic Center Library. We started with a free Monday program when the Eureka Loft was being built out. ASU was also a partner in developing curriculum, and we started kind of cultivating a lot of entrepreneurship activity in the space. And that eventually led us to doing work with the city of Phoenix. And here we are now doing work through our nonprofit, trying to problem solve things for people. And as a Hispanic business owner, it hasn't been a true, I would say, barrier for me to get ahead. Like I mentioned, I went to ASU, got my business communication degree. I practiced really hard to make sure that my communication skills were polished and on par with the executives that I work with. So that helped facilitate a lot of my own business. But as I watched the challenges of my other, of my clients that I work with, I started kind of understanding just really what other challenges exist out of there. Not to say that I haven't had any challenges. I have had challenges, but I learned through solving problems for my clients as well.
What would you say to someone, based on your experience of what you said, like I groomed myself to kind of fit in, right? Yeah. Because you understood the business world and you understood that you had to do that. What would you say to someone in today's world that would say, I'm not wanting to do that, and why can't Latinos just be recognized for what they bring to the table without having to do that?
Yeah. So I've had this conversation a lot with people where, do I embrace my cultural heritage or do I put it aside? I say you can do both, you know, and I think it's important to embrace your heritage while at the same time understanding that there are cultural norms that you also have to learn. To me, it's more of a personal choice that you decide what space do you want to work in? How do you want to present yourself to the world? How do you want to lead others? That's a very personal choice. And if someone were to ask me, well, what do I do? You know, people should accept me for just my heritage. Well, if the consumer doesn't understand what value the heritage brings to the consumer, then you're doing the consumer a disservice. So we have to kind of like bring that to the forth and say, well, my Latino heritage has allowed me to cook even more delicious foods because I have a lot more spices that I can bring to the table. Or my heritage allows me to understand the cultural norms or cultural barriers that exist before you start working at an enterprise. And, you know, all of those do come into play, and they're your best asset, you know, when you embrace your heritage, that you don't want to force it upon someone because you don't want a heritage being forced on you, but you can create an environment where people can learn and be inspired and take notice, especially when you embrace it and find the value for the other person. You know, it does boil down to what's in it for me when you're a business owner. And if you're making a choice between your heritage and your business, I say you can do both.
Thank you. And maybe we can revisit that because I think that's a very kind of like an identity question, right? Yeah. I mean, for me, myself as a professional as well, right? So, Valentina, what are your thoughts on that question?
It's a hard one. Are there obstacles? Absolutely. Is there discrimination? Absolutely. I think that on a very personal note, I sometimes don't even have to, you know, I can go through life and not say that I'm Mexican and I could, you know, blend in. I learned English at the same time that I learned Spanish. And so for me, from the standpoint of the linguistics or the accent, if I don't tell you, sometimes nobody will know. My significant other has an accent. And so it's an immediate, you know, oh, where are you from? I think that changes the narrative of things. I think there's a lot of preconceived ideas of, you know, who's a Latina or Latino. What should your business look like? You know, if you're a Latino and you have a restaurant, you must have sarapes and bright neon pink and twinkling lights, and everybody must be wearing a sombrero. Well, guess what? No. In my case, Mexico is so diverse that that's not what I identify with. You know, I grew up in the north. There's cacti, there's saguaro, there's sand. We love the ocean that is near the desert. You know, it's very different than, you know, sarape, twinkly lights and sombreros. That's not even something that I even grew up with. And so I think that it's that preconceived idea, right? You are Latino, you must do this. You are Latino, your business must look like this. You are Latino, then, you know, you must, you know, engage in certain activities where, you know, I personally don't like to be put in a box and labeled. I have taken my Mexicanness all over the world and I have celebrated it in my own way, you know, and I think that sometimes those are the hurdles. It's the preconceived notion and the ignorance truly of a country that is incredibly diverse and that should not be put in, you know, a caricature idea of what we should all look like. That's kind of, you know, some of the things that I've encountered.
So I have a follow-up question. So how much do you think, or do you think any part of that is our own culture and our own expectations among ourselves? And how much of it do you think it's kind of the reflection of the environment or the community in which you are conducting business primarily?
I think it's both. I think that as business owners and honestly, as members of a community, it is our role also to educate. You know, I find at the restaurant, whenever people know that I'm Mexican, it's like, oh, tequila. And you're like, well, no. You know, we make moles that take 3 days. You know, it's a work of art. You know, but it's a constant education as a business owner, but also as a member of the community in Scottsdale or in Phoenix. And I guess I should backtrack a little bit. And I don't mean to say that there's anything wrong with, you know, pink twinkling lights and serapes. Absolutely not. If that is what you want to portray, that's fine. But I think that it's our responsibilities as Latino business owners and members of the community to also educate that there's many different, you know, ranges of color in the Latino community. And so it's up to us too. I think that, you know, there's nothing wrong with education and respectful, you know, conversation to make sure that people slowly but surely just change those perceptions. And that's what I try to do in my everyday life.
Good. Thank you. Martin, what can you share with us some of those obstacles that you've experienced maybe as a Latino professional?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say, as a professional, I mean, growing up, you know, in the corporate world, obviously primarily English speaking, and always just wondering, you know, well, why don't we offer Spanish support, or why don't we have our documents in Spanish, right? And I was never at a level where I could really, you know, make a change, but looking back on it now, I could have asked why a lot more. And it really wasn't until, you know, I got into some leadership roles and I asked, why not, right? This is a large population. The revenue that this community brings is enormous. And why are we not taking advantage of that? Why are we not offering assistance to these folks who want our business? We want their business, we just don't want to do it in their language, right? We're really turning them off. So, you know, growing up and just really, like I said, climbing the corporate ladder and seeing like, why not? And eventually it got to the right person. And I said, why don't we offer that? And they said, you're right, why don't we? Why don't you put that together and see what that would look like? And then eventually it led to, you know, creating a Spanish support team, and eventually, you know, starting with 8 people for a large corporation, which eventually, you know, turned into over 100 in a couple different countries. So, you know, I would implore folks, you know, if you're in a place where that's not offered, to ask why not, and to give the reasons why you should be offering that, right? And it's not just so, you know, you get more business, it's to really help these folks. You know, before COVID, when we were traveling and I would show up in person, do educational events, I mean, you know, people would love that, right? They really wanted someone to be there to help them. It's like, oh, you know, the document, the help guide wasn't in Spanish. I didn't really know what was going on. And just seeing, you know, what they did, even without our assistance in fully in Spanish, like, it was like, wow, you got to this point without that help. I really want to get you to the next level. We want to make sure that all of our documents are in Spanish, all of our help articles and guides are in that. So really, I would implore folks, you know, why not? If you're not already doing it, why not?
So I think what you just said is a very valuable point, but I also think you hinted at something that's very prevalent, is when we don't have Latinos at the table, right? Because you talked about at a corporate table, maybe you didn't feel comfortable asking why is it in Spanish, but if you think about it, senior leadership also didn't either have that foresight or interest into our community. So it took you or your interest to get to a point where you made an impact, right? So to me, it highlights kind of the conversation about when we're not at the table, what does that look like from a company perspective? What are those obstacles to get more Latinos in senior leadership roles where we can impact community and we can make decisions? And especially in well, we're in government, right? So we're in a service industry as well. So it's applicable to everyone, right? Like any business you sit in, any space you sit in, is how do we advocate for our own people to improve the lives of our community members, especially where we're consumers and we don't sit in a space where somebody can advocate for us.
Absolutely, yeah. Advocacy is huge. I mean, if it's, like I said, if it's not already there, I mean, why not you to step up and ask that question, or to start that conversation, right? To get yourself a seat at that table to be able to do that.
Yeah, and you know, you guys touched on so many important key parts that, you know, is the core of why we're doing this. You know, how easy would it be for, you know, for us to sit on the Diversity Advisory Committee and bring in, some Mexican food or something, for a celebration. But we really, really wanted to dive deep this year. And that is, we're pulling stuff out of ourselves, right? We're bringing ourselves to the table and saying like, hey, what is important to us and how do we get that message out? And, Valentina, you hit it right on the head. This is education, and, side note production. This is one reason why we want this conversation to be super, casual and real, because a lot of the things that you guys have touched on are very important for people to know and to understand, so bravo, I think this is going great and we're getting a lot of cool things out of this. So
right. And I think sometimes a conversation about business owners, we oftentimes think, well, I'm not a business owner. I'm not, like that's not what I do, or I'm a student, or I like none of the above, or I'm just a first line worker, or I work in government. But really the themes that you identified are all identical themes in my career, right? And I've been in local government for like 30 years. And so I think it's looking past that and thinking about the struggles as a Latino, right? As a individual, and not having maybe access to the systems. And I see we have a very progressive, a lot of young people, more young people than even when I grew up, going to college and not necessarily being the first, first person in their families. And if so, having many more doors open than even in my generation. But I think it's very relevant when we get to tell our story in spite of whatever space we sit in, because it really is very relevant. I think sometimes we can close that door off or within our own culture and just like, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me, or that doesn't apply to us, or that's just them, or that would never happen to me, or I would never get that chance, or any of those things, or I would never be hired, right? Because, my English isn't perfect. So I just think there's a lot of relevance in the conversation we just had, in spite of whatever profession you're in or not, or a young professional. But so thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Actually, that's a great segue to our third question. And we want to know, what are the common misconceptions people have about Latino business owners? In your opinion, can you tell us how we can combat these misconceptions? And we'll start with Valentina.
Well, I would say that sometimes, again, we go back to the misconception of what is the Americanized version of a Latino business, right? You're going to walk into a restaurant and you're going to have like the whole family working there and all of them are going to be speaking in English. Well, guess what? You walk into Nona and you actually hear French. So, it's, if that just kind of throws you off, right? And I think that it is those misconceptions of cultural projection of what you should look like as a Latino. If I remember back in the day when I was a general manager, oh, you are 27 and you're a general manager. Do you live with your parents? Are you going to get married? It's like, no, I don't live with my parents. I haven't for 10 years. And, no, I don't have kids. I don't have 5 kids. It's putting it out there, we're not all the same. And I think that, all these ideas that are fueled by media and, you turn on Netflix, what do you see that's Mexican? El Chapo, Reina del Sur, it's not, we're not doing a good job at educating with the right tools. If we continue to let the narrative be created by non-Hispanic sources, then we will continue having these huge variances between reality and a Hollywood version of what a Latino is. And so we need to start raising our voices and educated and stepping in and doing things like this. It's just the fighting of that misconception is only, up to us to change.
So I'd like to add something to that question as well. And in answering your questions, the thought that you also only got that job because you were Latina, Because, you know, you said like the misconception of a young professional. There's also sometimes what follow us is, oh, but you probably got it because you were Latina, or, you know what I mean? Or there was a diversity initiative or affirmative action in the, you know, older day. So add that sentiment about whether you've experienced that in the workspaces that you've had, or the, you know what I mean, the places that you've occupied.
So here's the funny thing. I was a general manager when I was in my very early 30s, actually late 20s. I was the only Latina woman general manager of a company where there were 38 other general managers. As we know, the hospitality industry, most of the jobs are Latinos.
Right.
To me, it was the opposite. It's like, how can we not have more Spanish-speaking Latinos in positions of leadership in an industry that is fueled by the hands of Latinos? To me, it was exactly the opposite. Is I went into, you know, thinking, well, of course, I know both languages that I should know, you know, in a hotel or in a restaurant. Like, this is a no-brainer. And I actually found myself to be in a very lone situation, which was very surprising. You know, if I were a CEO of a hotel company, I would like to have a way more diversity on these leadership roles, so that, you know, you do have that connection with your team. To me, it was kind of the other way around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Edgar?
So my experience, one story that I can think of was several years ago, after, I think it was around 2012, 2013, that we started doing some entrepreneurship initiatives at the city of Scottsdale. And eventually I started running a program, a bilingual program for the city of Phoenix for entrepreneurs to get them through the startup process. And then I was invited to sit at a round table at Sky Song. And the head of our university, ASU, there was about 30 people sitting around the table. These were all folks representing different incubators, different entrepreneur programs, different business centers. And at the end of the event, I was participating in the conversation just like I was invited to do. And Dr. Crow came right up to me right afterwards and said, "Edgar, I want to point something out to you." And I said, "What was that?" And he goes, "You were the only Hispanic at that round table." And I will never forget that he said that. And I thought to myself, well, what does he mean by that? You know, I wanted to dissect that a little bit more. And he says, you know, what you're doing is very important, representing small businesses in their language. And that really was the thing that just kind of made my purpose and my work much more clear about what I was doing. Not only were we helping small businesses get started, but we were doing it in their language to help them put food on the table and avoid falling into predatory lending practices, falling into bad advice, falling into all of these dangerous situations that people will fall into when they don't have information readily accessible in their language. And so that was a very pivotal moment for my career, having the head of my university tell me that where you're sitting right now at this table is very important, and more of you need to be at this table. And so, you know, back to Valentina's point that, you know, leadership does start from within. You know, there are a lot of talented Hispanic business professionals that I work with that are doing great work in every corner of the state of Arizona. You know, unfortunately, the language barrier is also a challenge. I mean, I happen to be fluent in English and Spanish, and I have a lot of great cousins that don't speak Spanish at all because their parents didn't make the choice to teach them to be bilingual. My mom made it a very clear point to raise us as bilingual, because she said, "Mijo, vales por dos," when you speak two languages, and what she means is you're worth two people when you speak two languages. And, you know, that became a very, very important key piece into all of my work. In fact, when I introduce myself as bilingual, and it's not to discount Hispanic, but sometimes, you know, language does have more value in a business transaction or in a business conversation or in some kind of scenario. I have seen that, you know, if you use Hispanic, people do start coming up with different ideas of what that means. And you know, everyone has a Netflix version of what Hispanic is. And at least through my own personal leadership, I want to demonstrate a different type of Hispanic, an executive professional who embraces two languages and can do the work in two languages. To me, that's very important.
So I was going to ask you a question, but I think you actually answered it. And let me see if I'm right. Right when you said that the president of ASU approached you and said, like, pointed you out, like you're the only Latino. Yeah. I was going to say, did that fuel you, or did that offend you, or a little of both?
Well, I didn't know what to feel at first, and he did it in private, which was, and we had a nice conversation after that. He was explaining what his point was, but my initial reaction was, I am. Yeah. I wasn't thinking about that, but it also kind of forced me to look around the room a little bit more, and kind of start to see, just like Martin was saying, well, why not me? Why shouldn't it be me speaking up or advocating or leading or creating? Mm-hmm. And, that was my moment. That was my moment that I realized, oh, I need to look around the table, not just what I came for, I like to follow a schedule. So I always have one thing backed up with next to the other. So that day was kind of a busy day, but I will never forget that he did that. And I didn't get offended. In fact, I was actually honored that he made notice of that, because no one has ever made notice like that in a space or in a conversation like that before, to me directly.
Good. For me, and I think maybe this is, like I said, as you progress in your career, a little bit older than you, pointing that out. So I grew up on the border in West Texas, right? So coming to Arizona was a little bit like a different experience for me. So I wasn't really used to being the only Latino or Latina in the room, because I came from, majority Latinos, right? Yeah. And so it made me, number one, first, super aware, like you just said. Number two, like, oh, really? So it's me? Like, that's odd. And then now offended's probably not the right word. I just think, okay, I'm not feeling grateful that you're pointing out that I'm a Latina doing A, B, C, and D, because I think in 2020, there should be more of me, right? So that was why I resonated with what you said in terms of when people point that out. I think people point that out as a reference of like a congratulations, yeah. Which is okay, you deserve the space, where you're at. Mm-hmm. But I look back now and go, well, okay, but like there shouldn't just be one of me. But yeah. I appreciate it fueled you, and you answered that.
Thank you. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I think what's important also is that we touched on earlier, a lot of us resonate with what you guys said about the linguistics and how we have kind of groomed ourselves to, be who we're supposed to be at the table, right? What that looks like, what we think that looks like. And I know for me, in my, professional career, it hasn't been just, it's been recently where I've kind of embraced and been like, no, actually, of course, bring to light that I'm the only Latina here, or, let's talk about the fact that I'm, the only Latina at the table. And I think you're right. Like, kind of back in the day and early on, it was kind of like, well, just, don't shine light on it. Like we're just trying to be here and do our job. But now it's kind of like, a little bit more of a fueling moment. I can definitely understand that. So thank you for sharing. Martin, do you need me to go over the question again, or are you ready?
Yes, please. I was enthralled with their answers, so I don't know if I could touch more than what they already said. That was great.
What are common misconceptions people have about Latino business owners? In your opinion, tell us what we can do to combat these misconceptions.
Yeah, the biggest misconception is that they're all the same, right? To Valentina's point that you have to be a certain way. You can be a Latino-owned business and no one would know it, right? It doesn't have to be a certain way. There's such a variety. And a Latino-owned business is just like any other business, right? It's an American business, just like any other. There's absolutely no difference other than what you're putting into it. Whether you want to shine the light on the culture part of it or not, it doesn't really matter. You're still a business through and through.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our next question. So we've touched on different parts of the role, right, that you play, the nature of your businesses, our experiences, kind of good and bad, and how we've allowed that to generate kind of where you're at. And so we want to talk a little bit about the impact into our community. So as Latino customers, what is one way we can make a substantial difference? Like that could be in the businesses that you have, in the business world, or in the larger community. But like, what do you think is a larger impact that our community can make, either supporting Latino business owners or Latino businesses, or right, just supporting community or businesses that treat our community well?
Martin, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the biggest part of that is supporting the Latino businesses within your community, right? They're there to service you. You should support them if they're there truly to take care of you. You know, my wife and I, and then my kids now even see, we always make it a point to shop small, especially when we see there's an identical type of product, right? We're always gonna go to the smaller shop to do that because we know like what it takes, like, you know, someone building something by hand, right, to sell it. We know what goes into that, and we'd rather support that person and seeing that there's, you know, their family is there with them as well, and knowing the impact it's gonna make on them. So yeah, really just, I mean, the community supporting the community is gonna make the biggest impact right now. I mean, as far as businesses, I mean, it's never really been easier than to start a business than it is right now. And there's a ton of resources out there for you, Latino or not. So really just taking advantage of those and you know, doing, you know, webinars like these, and, you know, seeking assistance from Edgar and you know, the Scottsdale city here. So there's a ton of resources out there. Just really supporting one another is going to be the biggest impact that you can make.
Thank you. And what do you think is the role of our Latino business owners in the area of outreach?
Really to shine a light on themselves, right? To not just sit there and think, okay, well, I'm fine. Like to think about that next level that they can get to not be content with, oh, we're just a small shop, right? So you could be the next big thing, right? To not hold themselves down. I'll talk to small businesses and we'll talk to them about their future planning and what they're looking for. And they're like, oh, well, you know, I'm kind of happy where I'm at. I'm just kind of doing this thing. It's like, you know, start talking to them about, well, what's the next big thing that you could be doing, and really, you know, expanding on that and not just, you know, staying at that same level.
Good, thank you.
Edgar.
So to answer your question about outreach and what can we do to support the Hispanic community, if we're looking at the business side of things, of small business, you know, COVID-19 has disproportionately affected underserved and underrepresented communities by far and large, especially in small businesses. The rate of business closures is much higher in the Hispanic community than in any other community. And the thing that we can do right now that I think is very important, number one, is kindness during a pandemic. Kindness is going to be key. And number two, we need to buy local, support each other, eat at Nona's, buy at all these different restaurants that are bringing their flavors from their own culture to the table for you to enjoy, and then spread the message using social media and allowing other people to explore another custom, another culture in a different way. And so to me, it really is about making sure that we are supporting each other through our conscious consumer spending, being very conscious about where our dollars go, making sure that we're, helping the local business owner be able to invest in their own family and their own legacy. And of course, buying from each other, I think is very important. You can't do that all the time, but if you can shift even just 10 to 15% of your spending to local businesses, that will make a massive difference, and you have more money circulating in the economy. The other thing that I think is also very important is that if you do cater to a Spanish-speaking customer, invest in Spanish materials. There are many studies that show that you will increase your revenue up to 40% if you just put out your menu or put out an advertisement in another language. When customers feel that you're advertising in their native language, they feel welcomed. And I think that's also another key component for all of us to support each other, to be aware of the language barriers, to be aware that we're in a pandemic and we need to be kind, and to also explore all of the wonderful offerings that small businesses have, especially here in the city of Scottsdale.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that with sometimes the trap, if you will, or the obstacle about, everything should be in English. I really appreciate your comments around that, and we should honor and do that proudly, right? No different than if it was a multitude of languages. If you're serving community, you're serving community. So I appreciate your comments on that.
Thank you.
Great. Valentina, what is one way we can make a substantial difference as Latino consumers?
Definitely, I would go back with the guys. Show me the money. The day that this country realizes the economic impact of the Latino community, I mean, we are going to see a lot more of se habla español everywhere, you know? And we like to spend money, and we need to capitalize on that, and not only as consumers, but as business owners. And what I would like to, you know, kind of challenge ourselves to do is not only to stay, you know, in the Latino community. I think that as Latinos, we have this great sense of family and working together and kind of being a minority, you know, in a way. I happen to do business with a lot of other businesses that are, you know, from other communities, Ethiopian, or, you know, another African nation, or Asian, or, I mean, if we understand that this diversity has such push, and that there's ways of doing business as business to business. I mean, you know, my coffee purveyor is Ethiopian, you know, my, another type of purveyor is, you know, Chinese, and understanding that, you know, as small minorities, we have so much power too, and that we're all in the same boat, you know, the small independent business. And the other thing that I would say is we can make a substantial difference by not being afraid of having conversations and correcting and educating. To me, we're never going to move forward if we don't have things like this, you know, and open it up. I think as a country, we need to start talking.
Valentina, do you think there's enough formal connections, formal networking opportunities, formal gathering spaces for business owners of color? I know there's traditional, right, networks, if you will. Do you think that that's a gap, or do you, because sometimes I think in our own culture, we're not as comfortable stepping into that space with everybody, and that exists, but maybe that's not the place where you want to build genuine connections. Do you think there's a gap in that, or that there's an area that we could do better in that, in bringing kind of the communities that you talked about, the other business owners, to collaborate?
I think there's always room for improvement, for sure. Mm-hmm. Even as we sit here and we talk about Latino, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that we all come from Mexican backgrounds, but we're forgetting our Salvadoran friends, our Honduran friends, our Venezuelans, our Colombians, Central America, like, you know, I mean, even in our, you know, label of Latinos, you know, how much more can we expand, right? Like, let's even go further. Let's go all the way from Mexico to Chile, you know, even then, and then we can start thinking about the world. But do I think that there's opportunity? Absolutely. Do I think that there's a lot of us out there? Absolutely. I think that a lot of us, because we are in small family businesses, we work a lot of hours, and sometimes we are not privy to this beautiful hour to sit down and talk and you know, because that's the nature of our businesses. But I think that we need to start making time. I think that we need to start sitting down and chatting.
Right. So one of the things you said, you know, we definitely have to start making time. We have to, you know, educate. You know, along with this question, we said, you know, what's one way we can make a substantial difference, you know, to be a better consumer? But I'm going to twist this a little bit, and you know, I don't want to put this a negative spin on this, but be honest, how do we hurt as a consumer? You know, how do Latinos hurt, you know, either other Latino businesses? Is it, you know, not enough support? Is it, you know, whatever that looks like? But in your experience, and Valentina, we'll start with you. How, you know, how has our community, you know, maybe not supported, you know, your business or other businesses that you've been a part of?
I think awareness. You know, I think that again, if I go back to my, what I live, if you didn't know that Nona, because Nona Urban Eatery has nothing Mexican in it, you wouldn't know that it was Mexican owned or Latino owned. So it's awareness, it's educating yourself as a consumer and knowing where your money is going, and knowing how it's going to trickle down. If I go to Safeway to buy tortillas, I actually buy the tortillas that are made by a teeny little company. I don't buy the Mission. Nothing against them. But it's on me. It's my responsibility as a consumer to be aware of where my money's going, especially right now. So I would actually throw the question back at you and just say, it's up to us to know.
Absolutely. Edgar?
I totally agree with Valentina. I think the way we hurt ourselves is through, and this, I've done a lot of research on this, having worked with countless now, small business owners of Hispanic descent from all of Latin America as well. And the thing that keeps coming up as common threads that I see that hold our community back are limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs, I think, are very powerful, and they can be enforced through a religion. They can be enforced through family generations. They can be enforced in many, many different ways. And if you have, let's say we're speaking to an immigrant business owner who wants to contribute to the economy, and then they get confronted with the realities of 2020, and then you have these two limiting beliefs crashing into now a modern day era of limiting beliefs. I think that starts to hurt us. So what are those limiting beliefs? Like, for example, the idea of scarcity. There's not enough for everyone to go around. I think that's a limiting belief. And I've seen small businesses who will start a Mexican restaurant in one corner and another Mexican restaurant in another corner. And next thing you know, they're in competition with each other rather than thinking about collaboration. And collaboration, I think, is also a powerful force. And that's one of the things that we would always teach in our classrooms, that don't think competition. Just because they put Mexican food as their title of their business, that doesn't mean that they're going to take your customers away. Instead, let's think about how you add value. How do you differ? How do you make yourself better? What part of Mexico are you from? Are you from this specific region that they make tacos in a very specific way? Well, then make that your shining gem as a way to stand out. So, getting over those limiting beliefs, I think definitely hurt us. I think, they're reinforced through social media in some cases, with the false idea of what a perfect entrepreneur or a perfect lifestyle should look like. I think, when we start self-reflecting and start thinking about the things that I need to learn to make myself better, the things that I need to look at as my mistakes and how do I learn from the lessons of those mistakes, I think when we put the focus on that, then we can start then offering advice and offering, support to other businesses. But, it's an unfortunate situation. I wouldn't say that it is the majority of the business owners that I work with, but it exists. The scarcity mindset exists. And I think there's definitely enough to go around. We definitely have to be more conscious about our resources. We have a planet that we need to take care of. We have customers that we need to understand what their situation is during a pandemic. And of course, I got to make sure I do everything possible to make my business profitable, because that's how I feed myself. And so those are things that we all have to learn from. But I think limiting beliefs are definitely one of the things that I had to overcome personally. My family is Roman Catholic. I'm the oldest of 11 brothers and sisters. My father was the youngest of 10. My mother, the oldest of 16. And so we come from these big families who have a very strong religious system, right? And if some of those belief systems don't help me advance in my own personal career, then I have to let go of some of those limiting beliefs. And that's been a personal process, and it's been a process I've seen with a lot of my own students.
Great, Martin.
Yeah, those are great points by both Edgar and Valentina. Of course, I think you hit it kind of on the head there. What I was going to say right at the beginning there is, when you're going out and you're supporting the community, right? Oh, these are my friends. This is their business, expecting a discount or something, right? Or, no, like they're working hard there. I expect to pay full price. I don't expect to get the family or friends discount. It's like, we're there to support you because I know how hard it is and how much every dollar impacts your bottom line and supporting your family. So yeah, kudos to you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Great. We have a bonus question. Just very quickly, we'll go around. Do you want to do this one? We'll give you each 30 seconds, and we want to know if you have a brief chat with yourself at age 20. Knowing what you know now, what are you going to say? And Martin, we'll start with you.
I would
No
say,
pressure.
no pressure. But no, that's a great question. I would definitely bring up the fact that to embrace the Spanish speaking side, right? I mean, I hid it for so long, and you know, the opportunities that I've had to travel, to participate in great events became about because I spoke Spanish and I could, you know, assist our business side from that angle. So I would say to myself, you know, keep practicing that Spanish, keep it up. You know, Spanish was my first language. And so I grew up in the school system and I learned English that way. And then of course, you know, in the school system, kept English primarily, and then started to forget it. But yeah, I would say to myself, keep up the Spanish. It's going to take you places and it's going to get you paid more.
Yes.
Edgar?
Well, what I would tell myself at 20 is stop being so scared and go and chase your dreams already. You know, and embrace your heritage. Know that your language, your ability to speak two languages is going to get you to exactly where you want to go. And you know, keep your visors on and keep your focus on your goals and don't be afraid. That would definitely be the thing I would tell myself at 20. Great.
Valentina, you're 20 years old. What's that chat gonna look like?
Dang. First of all, is don't take life too seriously. I think that was, when I was 20, I was too serious and too worried. The other thing is take that Mexicanness and that Latina-ness and put it in your backpack and go. You know, don't be afraid. Just keep going. Keep going. I have been very fortunate that the fact that I am Mexican and that I speak multiple languages and that I'm multicultural has opened a lot of doors for me. And I know that I'm incredibly grateful for it, even though maybe in my 20s, I thought that would hold me back. It never did. And so I would tell myself to just put your backpack on and go. Just keep going. And when it gets tough, just keep going.
Good to know. Well, that concludes our questions, right?
Right. No, I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for those, especially those lasting comments, because I think they resonate all true in some form or fashion in our familias, in our upbringing, and our very best intentional way to grow our young people, right? So I want to thank each and every one of you for what you brought to the panel and taking the time to be with us, and hoping that not just our employees, but our community members can see the fabulous work that we have among business owners that are committed, that are open, that are interested in investing in community as well, not just growing their own business. So for that, I want to thank you on behalf of the Diversity Advisory Committee, and well, we'll get to meet you a little bit more down the road, right?